whenever you're ready. Okay, we got an exam set for Monday, and it's basically on everything up here that's red. So, Exam 2, Federalism Articles, Exam 2, Chapter 5, Civil Rights, Exam 2, Chapter 11, Congress. I talked to the 11 o'clock class today, and they decided that they wanted the circuit court stuff to be on the final. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove Exam 2 circuit court stuff for everybody, so that's going to be on the final. So it's going to be Federalism Articles, Civil Rights, and Congress. Now the only rule that I have on this is that Cheheb is not supposed to film because he filmed the back of Kelly's head last time. So since he's not filming, we should be good. Does anybody have any questions as we get started? And I guess let's just get started with maybe the civil rights terms from Chapter 5. Is there anything that jumps out on here that may give y'all any cause for pause or any concern? Any other terms for starters? Go ahead, jump here.
Invidious discrimination.
Invidious discrimination. Do y'all remember what invidious discrimination was? Anybody? Because we hit on that quick, and it was very much at the end of the chapter, invidious discrimination. The Constitution does not ban all forms of discrimination, and that's what people get confused about from time to time. It does not ban all forms of discrimination. And the examples that I had given you were, you have to be a minimum of 16 to be able to drive, you have to be a minimum of 18 to be able to vote, you have to be a minimum of 21 in order to legally be able to drink. However, invidious discrimination is banned. So if you ban something and there's not really a logical reason why. So for example, if we said, I'm not going to hire people to do a certain job because they have blonde hair, that's probably going to be invidious discrimination. Or if I'm not going to hire somebody because they're female or male, that's probably going to be invidious discrimination. The other example I had given you was if you went to the amusement park and it said you have to be this tall in order to ride this ride. You remember that? That would not be an example of invidious discrimination. And I guess, 16 to drive has something to do with safety or maturity. 18 to vote maybe has something to do with comprehension. 21 to drink probably has to do with comprehension and safety and maturity. And then, of course, you wouldn't want somebody too small riding a roller coaster because they'd get thrown out and get killed. So you get the idea. There are reasons why these things are not allowed. But if there's not a reason, a justifiable basis, then that's going to make it invidious. And invidious discrimination is not allowed. The government can ban that. What somebody started to yell something out before?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Number 4, what is the difference between de jure and de facto segregation?
De jure is by law, and de facto basically is by facts or by circumstance. So it is illegal to discriminate or to segregate by law. But if there are circumstances where it just naturally happens, that's legal. So for example, if you had segregated schools and the government said that only, a certain race could go to this school and a certain race could go to that school, that's de jure and that's illegal. De facto is if people just go to the school that they want to go to and it ends up being largely one school is one race and the other school is largely another, but they chose to do that, that's de facto, or basically by the facts or the circumstances, that's perfectly legal. Any other terms that you see up here? Go ahead.
ADA.
ADA. Does anybody remember what ADA was? Anybody remember ADA? I had read a quote dealing with this. Go ahead, Jean-Pierre.
Americans Disabilities Act.
Americans with Disabilities Act. And do y'all remember what we had discussed within the context of ADA? Widgets? No. We did talk about that. We did talk about that, but not within the context of ADA. Anybody remember ADA? Because I had talked to y'all about shopping aisles. You remember?
Oh, the width of a shopping aisle has
What
to
is
be
the width of a shopping aisle?
3 feet.
3 feet, yeah. And the basic idea is that the Americans with Disabilities Act was set up so that, in fact, people with disabilities, please come on in. people with disabilities would actually not be denied the ability to do what other people would basically take for granted. So we talked about the idea of the grab bars in the restaurants, the ramps, in fact, the wheelchair ramps. We talked a little bit about testing centers, these kinds of things. So the basic idea, or the 3-foot aisles, because if something, and the elevators at the University of Wyoming, I imagine you remember that. And basically the idea was that you could not, government could not do something that would, government had to provide people the ability to do things that people without disabilities would do, is basically what it's saying. And the last part of the quote that I had read to you basically said that while we feel like it's better, people with disabilities do not necessarily think so. We never covered sexual harassment. I guess we'll save that for the court chapter. That'll be fun. So you can go ahead and take sexual harassment off. Do you have any questions about any of the other pieces that are up here? Not everybody at once. Go ahead, Dante. You got a question.
Who's Matthew Shepard?
Anybody remember Matthew Shepard? Go ahead.
I think from what I read, he was a gay activist in the state of is it Wisconsin or
Oh God, not Wisconsin.
I forgot
A very important W state. Thank you, Wyoming, where I went to graduate school. Zoom in on Jean-Pierre. He should be embarrassed right now. Understand on this, Matthew Shepard, and this might have something to do with the reading quiz, but Matthew Shepard was the guy that was actually killed and actually tied to a fence where he died after he was beaten, and this was basically an orientation issue in Wyoming, and that is from the readings. But let's focus on the terms. Any of the other terms that are up here, because a couple of these are pretty big.
Dred Scott.
What was Dred Scott case? Oh, this is going to be a bad one. Nobody wants to talk today. Go ahead, read.
So basically, Dred Scott, when his master died, his master wanted him to be free.
Yes.
His his wife, she thought that because she was scared that he would be forced back into slavery.
Yeah.
That it would be better if she said that she would say, like, I'm going to say that I don't want you to be free. I want you to fight me in court. So she thought he would win that.
So they organized a lawsuit.
Yeah,
So
they organized
the dead master wanted him to be free when he died.
Yeah.
And then she's like, I want you to be free too, but we need the Supreme Court to kind of verify your freedom.
So, because she thought it would solidify or make it less likely that he would be, with the attention he got, snatched back into freedom.
Re-enslaved, thank you. Yeah, so what happened when they went to court? Anybody?
He was deemed property and he was denied freedom.
Yeah, Dred Scott was actually deemed as property. And understand on this, I mean, this really kind of got messy because the Dred Scott case kind of did away with the Missouri Compromise. The Dred Scott case was one that is considered the worst case in American history, really for two reasons, by the Supreme Court. One was that they said Dred Scott was property and he didn't have the right to sue. So it would be just like if a horse or if a car or if a cactus would decide to sue in court. Well, they don't have the ability to do that, so Dred Scott as a slave would not have had the right to do that. The other piece to this, though, is that they said your property is your property. And I think in all three of the classes, wherever it is that you are, in all three of the classes, I basically said, ask somebody, what is it that you drive? And if you drove to Florida, or if you drove to Maine, or if you drove to Washington, or if you drove out to Alaska, whatever the case might be, is your car still your car? Well, under the Missouri Compromise, of course, slavery could not be above 36 degrees, 30 minutes north latitude. However, it was, with the exception of Missouri, it was allowed to be below that. Well, they basically struck this down. They said, you know what, your property is your property wherever it is that you are. So this began to hasten the process of the Civil War actually occurring. So this was the worst decision because of what they said about a man being property, but it also led to the bloodiest war in American history. The Supreme Court decided to step in, and when they stepped in, it probably didn't work the way that they wanted. Do you remember who the Chief Justice was in that case?
Roger Taney.
Yeah, Roger Taney, T-A-N-E-Y, it was. And what was significant about him for a Marylander, Ryan?
Something happened in Frederick, which I don't know, or I don't remember.
Something happened in Frederick. You look like you want to say something.
There's a statue of him.
There was a statue of him up there outside of City Hall. Tawney was from Frederick, Maryland, and even though he was a Supreme Court Chief Justice really for decades, and he dealt with many other cases, he is forever associated with this one. And in fact, they just recently voted to remove that Tawney statue because, again, maybe this is revisionist history, maybe this was just furthering the idea that this was such an awful case, but the statue was removed, and we had a discussion about, well, who else maybe should we remove, because many of our founding fathers had dubious ties with slavery. You know, what does that mean for Washington, D.C., or maybe some of the other places? What other questions have y'all got from up here from chapter 5? Not everybody at once. Go ahead,
What do
Jordan.
you want us to know about the amendments?
What was the 13th Amendment? What did
Just
it
what
deal
they
with?
are?
What's that?
Just like what they are. And, like,
Well,
what they dealt with.
anybody, just tell me, what was the 13th Amendment?
It made slavery illegal.
Yeah, the 13th made slavery or involuntary servitude illegal. And that's,
You were a criminal.
say what?
Unless you were a criminal.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good. It seems like I've seen you in so long, and then you drop an answer like that. That's really good. So yeah, 13th Amendment dealt with slavery or involuntary servitude. The 15th Amendment, though, is one that we spent a lot of time on. What was it that the 15th Amendment said?
It's your right to vote as a citizen can't be taken away.
Okay, the 15th Amendment did deal with the right to vote, but did it grant the right to vote, or did it do something different?
No, that was that really stupid stuff where they were like, they can basically decide like whether or not you're allowed to vote based on like your heritage, sort of.
Your heritage. What were the 3 factors?
Gender.
Wasn't gender.
How smart you were?
No, it wasn't how smart you. What were the 3 factors? They basically said in there, they didn't say that you had the right to vote, but they said that the right to vote that you have cannot be denied on account of
Race.
color, still not gender, previous condition of servitude. Those were the 3 things. Now the trick on this, and I want to make sure that we're clear on this. Brian, you just stepped into that hole perfectly. It's not that it gave the right to vote, but it gave reasons why you could not deny somebody the right to vote, which means you could deny somebody the right to vote for other reasons. Do you remember what the tests were? Go ahead, Bree.
There was a soap bubble test.
How'd the soap bubble test work?
You had to count all the soap bubbles that were on there in order to vote, I think. And
Yeah.
then there was also, you had to pay like a big fine, like $50 or something.
Okay,
to-
let's go back to the soap bubble test. Okay, now understand on this. In different states, and these would predominantly be southern states, but they didn't necessarily have to be. So different states would have these tests. And the idea was, remember, the right to vote shall not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. So Reed, go back to yours. The soap bubble test was the first one. Okay, you would have to answer the question, how many bubbles are in a bar of soap? So when you went to vote, they would ask you this. Could you honestly answer that question?
No,
Could they, the people that were in charge of the polls, honestly answer that question?
no.
No. So who would they likely deny the right to vote to? Anybody.
People of lower class or, poor, even if they were white, poor, white.
Yeah.
And blacks.
Yeah, the freedmen would have been a good example of this, and also poor whites. Were they being denied the right to vote on account of race or color or previous condition of servitude? No, they were being denied because they didn't know how many bubbles were in a bar of soap. And what's significant about this is that that's part of the reason why they denied the right to vote to poor whites, because as soon as you denied it to both races, that means it was not based on race or color or previous condition of servitude, because you would be denying it to people that would have been from different races that wouldn't have been previously slaves. What other tests? Because there are 4 or 5. Go ahead. Wow, Gabe.
Wasn't there one about like a jar of jelly beans?
What was the jelly bean test?
It was like they were in front of you and tell you how many jelly beans there were.
How many jelly beans are in this jar? And to be honest with you, you know what? If they really, the people that were in charge of the polls, if they wanted you to vote, you were always going to get it right. And if they didn't want you to vote, then in fact you would always basically get it wrong. Were you being denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude? You were being denied the right to vote because you didn't know how many jelly beans were in a jar. There's like 3 more. Anybody remember? Go ahead.
Literacy test.
What was the literacy test?
It was when they asked you to read stuff.
Yeah. read stuff. Go ahead. And anybody can jump in. Go ahead, read.
Couldn't they also use different languages? They would ask you to read like different languages.
They could have done a number of different things with this. So if they wanted you to vote, they would give you a very easy path